another section here, questions from members and from subscribers, or questions even from YouTube. You know, we get a lot of questions, and we enjoy answering questions. And so let's look at a couple of questions that we have here, and then we're also going to look at the questions you guys have asked here, and we'll go through all of them here. Okay, so we're looking at in this particular case here. First question there was related to Maryland tax liens and them redeeming.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great video. Thanks. Question: what would happen if the owner of the property pays back the lien amount before 6 months and before the foreclosure period? And that was off one of our Maryland tax lien videos. The reason I included that is because Maryland, essentially, you can start the foreclosure at 6 months, but it needs to be done within a year and a half. And so their question is what happens if that property owner pays back? And that's just where you're going to get your redemption. In fact, most of the time, that's what's going to happen, is the property owner is going to pay back within that 6 months. If you start the foreclosure process, then they'll have to pay back the money, the interest, and what you put into the foreclosure. But really, that's kind of the whole point of tax liens, is they'll usually go ahead and get redeemed. And in that case, you'll make your money and your interest.
Yeah, it's only a small percentage that will actually go through, you know, and result in a foreclosure. But the redemption is where you earn a high interest rate return, which is what most people are after with the liens. Is a good secure investment, and it's only on, you know, the outliers, you know, where you actually have them go, you know, fully through foreclosure. So another question here is from Vendetta. Say, hi, thanks for posting this video. I'll be checking out your website. I do have a question. I found a bunch of over-the-counter tax liens in a county here in Florida, and there are a lot of them in a, you know, quote, new subdivision where most of the lots are vacant. All the liens are for vacant lots. There looks to be hundreds in what will be a future housing subdivision. Why would there be so many tax liens on lots here? Are those worth getting?
Yeah, this is actually kind of a great question. What's kind of interesting is this was just asked today, and today, I was actually thinking of using, as far as the deal of the week, going through and looking at some of the over-the-counter tax liens in Florida, because Florida just had their sale. But in going over it, I saw different types of properties like he's talking about, and part of the issue with properties like that is really the fact that those subdivisions have been around sometimes since the 60s or 70s, and so the fact that they may or may not get developed is kind of a big question mark, because it's been so long that they haven't been developed. And in addition to that, usually these tax liens will have many other tax liens on it as well. So you really need to look and check out the market value within the area and see if there's lots in that area selling, if it's accessible. Are they paved roads, dirt roads, or is it just paper roads? All that's going to make a big difference, but would really check out the market value before purchasing these tax liens, because there could be a reason why they didn't get purchased at the tax lien sale.
Yeah, that's the one question we're always asking ourselves, you know, with over-the-counter stuff, especially over-the-counter liens in a place like Florida, you know, that traditionally will sell all of their liens. And so if they have a whole bunch of over-the-counter liens, they could have had those liens for years. And so we would want to be looking at the roll-up on those to see just how much roll-up, because it's probably going to be 7 years worth of roll-up on them. You know, the maximum amount in Florida. Uh, and that could still be a good deal. I mean, you know, there are areas in Florida that we found, you know, subdivisions that were planned a while, you know, years ago, and that are now starting to fill in. But then there's also ones that were never, they never lifted off the ground. You know, they never really, you know, they were never developed fully. And so, yeah, there could be a big risk there between different kinds. And yeah, the liens you're looking at against properties, when you're dealing with lots out in a place like that, they're going to charge you for stuff like dealing with sewer stuff and dealing with things, and that can result a lot of times in liens against the department doing it. Basically, liens that department will issue liens against the property, and so you know, in most cases, you know, there'll be liens like utility liens. Essentially, is kind of one way you could look at them. Is, you know, that there can be utility liens against a property, like against those types of properties. So, in addition to, however, you've got to whatever you've got to pay in taxes, there could also be, this much owed in liens. And so there's a lot to consider, before you buy a property like that, and making sure that it has enough value there to justify paying those kinds of prices for it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's where you're going to need to look at the market value. So, do a little bit more research there on those liens. They could be good, but they could also, there could be a reason why they're over the counter.
Yeah. And then last question here is, what about all these auction properties that say no trespassing and you cannot look at a property or have an inspection before buying? Is that true, or do you all go inspect properties that say no trespassing? It's kind of a funny question. So with the tax sale, one thing to keep in mind is in most cases, we don't, the property is not owned, I mean, it could still be occupied, by somebody. It hasn't officially transferred ownership there yet. And so, yeah, you can't really go into it. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't go and check out properties, because we will. In fact, if it's improved properties, we need to go by and get images of the property in order to figure out the condition of it. But we don't just necessarily ignore no trespassing signs and that kind of thing either, though. So we try to, I guess we try to use good judgment in how we approach properties. If there's property owners outside, we usually let them be, and we'll take pictures as we drive past. If it's a vacant house, obviously vacant, then sometimes we'll stop and look at it.
Yeah, yeah. Really, you can't do any type of inspection before the auction. And like Shade said, the property owner hasn't been sold yet, so it's still in the old owner's name until the actual tax deed auction takes place. That's the reason we see redemptions, is that owners are paying off those property taxes before the auction, because maybe they're still living in the home, or renting the home, or whatever reason. And so because of that, we can't just automatically start going through and looking, or trespassing on a property that's not legally ours. So they put that in there as a disclaimer, just like we would tell you as a disclaimer that, that it would be trespassing, and if you were to go there and actually access the property, then that would essentially be against the law. But there is exceptions to that. In New York, they do have, in properties that are not not occupied, they will, sometimes some of the counties will have walkthroughs that you can walk through the properties. But that's going to be really state specific, and so in most cases, we're going to be able to make a judgment of the property from what we can see from the street.
Yeah. Now we'll look at some of your guys' questions here. Tyler had a great question. Are there tax liens on over-the-counter properties too? And yeah, over-the-counter properties can have tax liens. In fact, in some ways, they're even more likely to have tax liens against them sometimes than other properties are. But any property, whether it's owned by the county and is over the counter or coming up for auction, could have liens against it. And so that's why we always look. But the longer a property's been sitting on the books, the higher the chances are it could have liens against it. So yeah, that's absolutely true. Is it like regrid? I'm not sure on that one, Marl. You can. It was probably related to something we were looking at there specifically, I'll bet. Okay, let's see. George here. Can you explain more about how you get comps with the GIS map? Yeah, so maps, the main things we're usually dealing with GIS maps are either base maps or layers. And sometimes we deal with both. We play with base maps to figure out what we want underneath. And a lot of times in the layers, you can have, or it could be in a base map. So usually it's going to be layers where they'll have sales information. And so if you're looking at a base map of GIS, if you're looking in GIS mapping, you're looking for layers anywhere there, and for anything that mentions sales. And if you click on that, a lot of times what it will do is it will then put another layer over that map, an overlay, and will highlight all of the sales that have occurred over a set time. And so that's the one thing that's worth looking for, especially if you're trying to find comps on properties, because it'll show you, all the properties that have sold over the last 4 years or something, and it can be pretty handy, and helping you see how old some of the sales are, how recent they are, and what the amount is.
Yeah, kind of add to that. Not all counties will have it set up that way. More and more counties are adding these different tools to it. So sometimes you'll be able to do it that way. Sometimes you'll be able to go into the county and review the sales from another platform or from a list. So it'll kind of depend on the individual county on what's available, but they can be very helpful. In fact, a lot of areas in Florida have those type of tools built in to either their assessment information or their GIS maps.
Yeah, in fact, Anne and Monica have questions that are kind of related here. Anne's asking, are there any counties in Florida that are up and coming? And Monica's wondering, when does Florida have tax lien and tax deed sales? It's a great question. So each state is very much, just doing it based on its own law. And so states like Florida's a unique state. It's not really like any other state, but they have a good system in place there where they have both liens and deeds. Their lien sales are held annually, so once a year, and usually in the month of May, I think. And meaning that they just wrapped up, just last month. The over-the-counter stuff is it's probably a good time right now to look at over-the-counter stuff if there's anything left there of it. But a lot of the properties will get purchased up. A lot of liens will get purchased up at auction. Now, in Florida, what they do is if you buy those liens, they have a 2-year redemption period. When that redemption period comes to an end, you would have to apply for a tax deed with the county. And what the county does is they then put the property into an auction, an upcoming auction. And so that's how they have deeds. And it's also why they have regular or more sales and not necessarily just one tax deed sale a year. They actually have tax deed sales every month, and some of them have tax deed sales multiple times every month. And so, in answer to, are there, any counties in Florida that are up and coming? It seems like almost like all of them kind of are up and coming in terms of real estate. There's lots of parts. I mean, we've been in lots of counties there, and you can, in practically every county, there's going to be a corner of the county that's growing, with new construction, or that has one of these old subdivisions that are starting to fill in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so many of the counties in Florida have moved over to online auctions. There's really just a handful of counties, left that still do live auctions. In fact, that's some of those live auctions is where we'll take some of our students when we do the buying tour and go out to attend an auction. And so, as far as that, really, it'll kind of depend on your capital. There's going to be some counties that are going to be better to invest in if you're looking for land, where they maybe have lots that are selling between, $3 to $5 grand, $3 to $10 grand. There'll be other areas where if you're looking for structured property, of course, they'll be combined within that same area, but it'll really kind of depend on what you're trying to go after, in which county is going to work out best for you.
Yeah, really. And the market there is so good that it's just a strong real estate market across the state. And so I don't know if I would necessarily point out, we tend to go where the opportunities are at. And so I don't know if we've got any favorites necessarily. Our favorite is whichever one's holding the auction right now. And so, but there are auctions happening all the time, lots of them, and throughout the month. And so, any given month there are dozens of auctions happening in Florida, and in lots of other states. States like Texas that we were looking at, they have they're up to maybe 20 different counties now, 15 or 20 different counties that have online auctions. If you live in a place like Texas, you can go to live auctions. They do it every month. They have a live sale they do every month there. So it all depends on what you're going after, though, like Steve was saying.